When you're ready.
Death and adaptation. The investigative question that I researched was, how does experiencing the death of a loved one and the circumstances that surround it affect the way an individual adapts to their new environment? Experiencing the loss of a family member or loved one and the grieving that follows it will change the way someone adapts to the world around them. Losing this person will result in grief, which is accompanied by feelings of anger, shock, sadness, numbness, regret, disbelief, denial, and confusion. The way someone reacts to these emotions will affect the way they adapt to the new environment. However, it is first crucial to understand the differences between grief, grieving, and mourning. Grief is a natural response to losing somebody you love. Expressing grief is the way in which you react to the loss of a loved one. This grief comes in 5 stages. They are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Grieving is the process in which an individual comes to terms with the loss of a loved one and how they learn to live with it over time. Everyone is going to feel grief forever, but they are not supposed to grieve forever. Mourning refers to how grief and loss are shown in public settings. It can be affected by social, cultural, and religious customs or traditions. One example of this can be Días de los Muertos in Mexico and how they celebrate and honor the dead. There are some people who find it exceedingly difficult to adapt to grief and move on from the loss of their loved one. If these people experience symptoms of separation distress, yearning, searching, and excessive loneliness for 6 or more months after a death, they will develop complicated grief. This is a harmful disease that causes a significant impairment in occupational areas of function. This leads to a negative way of adapting to their new life and environment. In the Victorian era, there were specific fashion rules for mourning directed towards women. They were expected to wear simple black dresses with no bonnets or trim. These fashion rules did not apply to men. Men were expected to return to work right away and could wear whatever they pleased. These differences based on sexuality is ultimately what caused the differences in adaptation. The women had a more difficult time adapting to their death and their new lives because they had a constant reminder of their loved one based on the clothes they were wearing. Men, on the other hand, had an easier time adapting to death because they were able to get into the pattern of their normal lives. One of the artifacts that this research can be connected to is the migrant mother photograph. This picture was taken during the Great Depression, when grief and loss were some of the most prevalent emotions. The mother in this photograph is specifically portraying emotions such as grief. Her 2 children are hanging onto her shoulders, using it as a shield from the world. Adaptation to grief and possibly death will represent itself differently in the mother and her children. The mother will have an easier time adapting to her new life because she is older and has a better understanding of what is going on in the world. Her children, on the other hand, will have a more difficult time adapting to their lives because they are too young to understand what is going on in the world and why it is happening. The type of relationship that an individual had with their relative or loved one that died determines how they will adapt to their death. If an individual had a difficult relationship with the deceased, they will be surprised with the painful emotions they feel following the death. This will make adaptation harder since they will long for a relationship they never had and they can't get. If the person who died was absent in the individual's life, then they will also have a more difficult time adapting to the death. On the other hand, individuals who had a loved one pass away due to a terminal illness will have an easier time adapting. According to Beverly McCoy, this gives them the opportunity to complete unfinished business and prepare loved ones for the actual loss. Although this doesn't make the death any less painful, it prepares them for an easier way of adaptation. Losing a loved one is a big challenge. However, this time also provides opportunities for growth and resilience. According to the Dark Side of Resilience artifact, resilience is defined as the ability to adapt to stressful circumstances and bounce back from adverse events. It contracts during the good times and expands during the bad times. Death is obviously correlated to the bad times, and thus it provides an opportunity to build resilience. With more resilience comes a better ability to adapt to stressful circumstances, which in turn will make adapting to life and death an easier task. The main problem that results with losing somebody you love is the struggle to move on and adapt to life without them. The Duke Health Center has come up with 5 practical steps to make adapting to loss easier and more manageable. They are talking about the death, accepting your feelings, taking care of yourself, reaching out and helping others deal with the loss, and remembering and celebrating the life that was lost. There are many pros aligned with these 5 steps. Talking about the death of your loved one with friends and family will help you understand what happened and will prevent you from falling into isolation, which will disrupt the healing process. Accepting all of your feelings will lead you to a complete adaptation of loss. Taking care of yourself by eating a well-balanced diet, exercising daily, getting enough sleep, and staying active will help remedy you. It is necessary to prioritize health when dealing with loss since it takes a big toll on the body. Reaching out to others and helping them deal with loss will help yourself simultaneously. By sharing stories, talking about the loved one, and doing the little things they loved will provide a sense of comfort and familiarity. Finally, remembering and celebrating the loved one who passed will not only help you move on, but will help you to not forget them. Although the pros outweigh the cons, there are still some harmful effects that can come from adapting the loss. There is always a possibility for miscommunication and argument between the living family members and friends. Miscommunication can stem from different perspectives about what happened and why it happened. Argument can stem from some people moving on faster than others. This can raise questions such as, did you even care, or did you even love them? In some cases, talking about the death of a loved one can only increase feelings of sadness, which will send the individual into a spiral of depression. In other cases, the death could have been so traumatic that talking about it or even thinking about it could raise bad memories and can potentially do more harm than good. Adaptation to death is different in every individual. Factors that can affect the way one adapts to loss include gender, age, time, and type of relationship. There are certain steps that can be taken to improve coping with the loss for those who struggle with it. Going through the death of a loved one will never be easy, and it is normal to grieve and feel sadness. But eventually there comes a time where accepting death is crucial because adaptation depends on it.
How did your research question evolve as you moved through the research process?
So initially my research question was simply, how does experiencing the death of a loved one affect how you adapt in the world? However, as I started researching, I realized that it isn't just the type of person, but it's the circumstances that surround the death and the situation aligned with the death that affects how someone adapts. So I made my research question involve the circumstances and situations that which and what will affect how they adapt in the world.
Okay, thank you. What additional questions emerged from your research?
One additional question I have is if acceptance to death can happen without adaptation, because adaptation to death cannot happen without acceptance. And so I was wondering if acceptance can happen without adaptation, and that is a research question that I think is important because acceptance to death is one of the most important stages of grief because it is the last stage, even though they're not linear, it always comes last. So I think this is really important because adaptation without acceptance doesn't exist. So it's important to know if acceptance without adaptation would not exist too.
Okay, thank you. Another round of applause.